Greetings, everybody. It's Jim. I know I owe you the GURPS Conan sourcebook video yet. That's going to be taking a little longer, though, because it is going to be longer. But I just had this idea pop up in my mind after watching a show called Invincible, which is a great superhero show, by the way. I know you might be super saturated with superhero stuff. This is fresh and new. All the characters are written well, both good guys and bad guys. It's really fun. It's this weird thing of almost like adult situations, taking it really seriously, and at the same time, there's a comedic level that just brings the entire comic book thing back to your childhood. It's a weird mix. It's really good, ultra violent. I think you'll like it. But basically, I was watching this, and I remember when it comes to role playing, I've always heard that GURPS really stops at a certain power level. Whether it be with their psionic powers or with GURPS Supers, it just doesn't work. And there's a lot to be said about that because basically they're kind of right. The kind of narratives that go into most superheroes, and I shouldn't say GURPS can't do it. It just doesn't do it really well by default. Okay, it is based on as much realism as you can get, and kind of superheroes isn't that because a lot of it is kind of like the DM has to fudge a lot, for that because superpowers would absolutely kill people. And that's kind of what I'm going after today because basically, when it comes to games, it's like Marvel superheroes, of course, back in the day, and the fate system of modern times can definitely handle the more of the GM kind of tongue-in-cheek, let's see what happens kind of effects that supers would actually have. But today I'm going to be going over a revelation that I just had a little bit ago that actually GURPS Supers, it does work. So let's go over the default idea of what classic comic books fighting is like, right? Or conflict. Good guy meets up with the bad guy, they fisticuff or whatever superpowers they use, and the next thing you know, the good guy is hurdling the bad guy to 12 issues back. We don't see him for a while, right? While maybe worse for wear, the hero is still coming back next issue. That's the way it rolls. Now, the thing is, GURPS by default, especially when you get superpowers in the game, combat is deadly. And even though they do have advantages like hard to kill, which really makes it tough. But the thing is, everybody's got to have that hard to kill skill. You think of it, Lois Lane and Jimmy Olsen would definitely have that skill. Okay, and it maybe not just be hard to kill because that assumes you're getting hit in the first place. But for some reason, out of all the human beings that would get hit by lasers in a fight, if Lois Lane and Jimmy Olsen, who have no powers of their own, is there, they're not getting hit at all. Combat happens in comic books at the speed of plot, right? And GURPS doesn't do that well without a lot of fudging, while systems like Fate actually have that figured in. So this is where the epiphany came in with watching Invincible, okay? Is the idea that there was more of a hyper-violence to a lot of these things. You see that in superhero shows like The Boys, The Watchmen even. And even though that was made early on in the 80s, The Watchmen, that was an exception. That's why it was probably so popular as opposed to the rule. Because the power, if people actually had these powers, it would be ultra-violent. It wouldn't be these really cleaned up versions of every little fight, where everybody can punch each other like, it's the difference between WWE wrestling and the UFC. UFC would be more like the real world. And if you want, a comic book version of it, it would be the WWE. Everybody comes back next week for more, right? While the UFC is like, no, I gotta rest for 3 to 6 months before I fight again, But let's look at Sue Storm. Sue Storm, the Invisible Girl, right here, classic character. So how would she be portrayed in a classic comic book and a newer comic book? Well, let's put it this way. In the classic version of Invisible Girl, obviously she can turn invisible, but I'm talking about her force fields. Basically, she can make these force fields and she can actually make them in different shapes. Like she can encircle the group and they can fly off the Fantastic Four somewhere else, right? But the modern version of her would be more like John Byrne wrote her in 1988, 90 or something like that. Her mind got taken over and she turned into somebody called Malice. And the thing is, now the writers could let her unleash her power because really, if you have this idea of she can control force fields, well, who's to say that she can't make it a like microscopic thin layer of that force field and just slice through somebody? Right? I mean, it was pretty intense. Like, if she's the most powerful member of the Fantastic Four, probably by far because of that. But the thing is, that's the difference between a more condensed version of classic and something more modern. And this is where GURPS can actually come into play. So the irony is this has all come full circle. While decades ago GURPS Supers came out and it had a reputation and has kept that reputation of not being good for comic books genre, the thing is now everything kind of twisted around with all these TV shows and comic books coming out with this hyper-realistic model, and that is the key word here, hyper-realistic, which is right up GURPS Supers' alley. Folks, I think it's time to give GURPS Supers another shot.